Hi everyone, how's it going? Yeah, I'm not going to be talking about gang stalking today. I'm going to be talking about something that caught my attention because I was looking at a video called The Seven Deadly Sins of Modern Writing, and I was scrolling through the comments because a lot of these comments had like a lot of great things to say about both the video essay and about the writing of Has Been Hotel, which is what this video was about. And it was centered around the creator Vivienne Madrano and the inherent problems that there are with both her writing and the writing of the 9 other writers that formed the Amazon series, right? So there was one comment here. Actually, there are 2 comments that I want to highlight. The first one is, I also think of a number 8 sin that is not studying on how to write a story, because most of the story's flaws can be fixed by reading the rules of basic writing, especially when it comes to character personality, like the reason Angel Dust, which is a character in the show, was accused of being a gay for straight women. Put a pin in that because I'm going to be coming back to that. A gay for straight women is because he was written the way some women fetishizes gay people, which this is equal to men fetishizing lesbians. And that is why he feels unrealistic. But again, all could have been avoided by just learning the basics of writing. So this person made a really excellent point about the way gay people are still written in modern writing, right? And this is supposed to be an age where people are more enlightened about sexuality, but you would be surprised how many women fall into this trap and how many women actually fetishize queer people without even realizing they're doing it. There are some people who do it actively up here, and then there are some women who do it passively through assuming that gay men are just hypersexual all the fucking time, and that's just not the reality of the situation. So that was already a great comment. That was already like, there was so much packed into that. But then comes this really long comment by this person, and I'm going to read all of it, because it is a masterclass in how to break down like the personal problems and the societal problems within Vivienne Madrano's writing when it comes to queer characters. This is perfect. So I want you guys to listen to this comment. I'm going to read all of it. You don't want to listen to it, you can skip, but I'm going to read all of it because it is so good. All right. TLDR. Vivzie can't handle gay characters or relationships. I think people are too quick to dismiss this certain criticism. It seems throughout Vivzie's work, she isn't capable of writing healthy or realistic MLM gay relationships characters. I won't jump to conclusions on what kind of person Vivzie is, but I'd like to just point out a pattern that I've seen in her work. There's nothing wrong with gay male characters being salacious, sex workers, abusive, but when all your notable male gay characters are that way, it's pretty telling. Angel and Valentino, in a classic pimp scenario being obvious, creating sympathy for Angel through common stereotypes of sex workers being taken advantage of, but the show also jokes about Angel sexually harassing people and it's never properly addressed. Neither is his drug addiction. That's not even mentioning Stolas and Blitz in Hell of a Boss, that's another of Vivienne Madrano's works, which are a whole mess. They're both introduced as creepy sexual predators. Stolas harasses Blitz, especially in the pilot, and holds the grimoire over his head to get him to sleep with him. Blitz constantly harasses Moxie, and the show makes a joke out of him trying to get into a threesome with Eminem. And before anyone brings up Stella, that's Stolas' wife, for context, we're talking about demons here. We're all talking about demons here. So Stolas and Stella are Gosha. They are Vivienne Madrano's versions of Gosha demons, or is it Goetia? Or is it Goetia demons? So they're that version of Goetia demons or Gosha demons, right? And they're basically like archdukes and aristocracy in hell. And then you've got imps who are of a lower class status. That's for context, all right? So before anyone brings up Stella, the only reason that conflict occurred in their marriage was because Stolas was sleeping around with imps, lower class people in hell. I'd argue that the relationship between Stolas and Blitz itself is nonsensical and should never have been forced in the first place. They're both incredibly broken individuals, and Vivzi can't handle this subject with maturity and care. Compare that to relationships with women in them like Millie and Moxie, or Charlie and Vaggie. There is a huge difference. Those relationships are allowed to be loving, healthy, and not constantly talking about sex. This is true. If you've watched the animated series of both Has Been Hotel and Hell of a Boss, you will know that the lesbian relationships handled in that, there is a lot more complexity. There's a lot more richness emotionally of like, there's a lot more going on. And their relationships are allowed to be loving, healthy, and not constantly talking about sex. They're capable of being their own people and talking through issues together. Adding on. Moxie has his issues, sure, but he's also the only queer male character who's allowed a loving relationship, and this is with a woman. He's also notably less traumatized and hopeless than other male characters. Chaz, Moxie, Millie's ex, does nothing to divert this pattern, also being an incredibly sexual, conniving, harassing asshole who abandons Moxie. Okay? I'd also like to note that in Vivzi's Zoophobia comic, an earlier version of Alistair was meant to stalk and torment an openly gay character of hers, Autumn, a 17-year-old boy. To reiterate, I don't think that any of this is horrible on its own, but concerning when you put it all together, and I'm not the first to say this either. It may just be indicative of a larger problem with her writing, that she tends to project her own problems, trauma onto those characters, which she openly admitted to with Angel, and that she isn't interested in writing characters that are deeper than tropes and stereotypes. This may just be me, but it's clear that men-loving men relationships characters are not treated with the same dignity. Ooh, listen, when I saw that comment, there were so many things that went through my mind. First of all, right, instead of me thinking about Vivienne Madrano herself, it made me think about, cis-het people or cisgendered people and our relationship with people who are othered. Like in women's case, our relationship with, the way we think about gay men, like subconsciously think about gay men. Now, it's not the same with every single woman, so I'm speaking in generalities here. It makes me think of the way women perceive gay men or trans women, and then also how men perceive, usually lesbian women, because they don't seem to care about trans men that much. It's a whole can of worms that I'm opening up in talking about this, but I really want to talk about this because I feel like it's important. I feel like patriarchy has really created this complex situation where, even in this day and age, there's still a lot of sexual repression. And predictably, when the trend of acceptance wears off and it stops being fun and it stops being easy, that's when we try to turn the tide towards the opposite political leanings of conservative values, because, acceptance stopped being fun. Now we have to watch the words that we say. Now we have to have trigger warnings. Now we have to consider everybody when we're creating something. It stopped the acceptance of marginalized people and the LGBTQ community, which is the topic of this video. It stopped becoming fun. So now, we don't want to keep watching what we say and this, that, and the third. So now they're going back to conservative values because the hard work, the emotional labor is something that a lot of people do not want to do. The terrifying thing about this is that people would literally rather be genocided than have to do the emotional labor of being inclusive genuinely, not just like in action, but also in here as well, like being inclusive. So it's like, rather than do that hard work of changing hearts and minds, we'd rather go back to women having no rights, people being genocided, and LGBTQ people being socially cleansed. I don't know how else to say it. So, my original point is that I was going to say that even in this day and age where, arguably there are more sexual freedoms in the West, there's still a lot of sexual repression going on. There's still a lot of sexual repression, and especially with regards to women, there's still a lot of sexual repression. There's still a lot of peer pressure, even when the laws are not there. Even if the laws, rolling back Roe v. Wade in America and rolling back abortion rights here, even if that wasn't present, there was still a lot of peer pressure on women to behave in a certain way. And the only types of women that, usually are okay with not being stereotypical are usually either, extremely brave, or they're sociopaths. Do you understand what I mean? Like, or they belong to the dark triad. It seems like the only people who are willing to go outside the norms of society are people that are exceptionally brave, which is a small amount of people really, and people who belong to the dark triad, or women who belong to the dark triad. Otherwise, a lot of women who are very empathic, very kind, like they want to follow the status quo as much as possible, and they want to do it because ultimately they want to avoid hurting other people. And quiet as it's kept, in a patriarchy, men do the same thing. Men are getting along to go along, not just to preserve themselves and what they want, but also to not disrupt the status quo, because in their minds, if they disrupt the status quo, then that leads to chaos that other people can't handle. So this whole thing about trying to maintain patriarchal values is simply an act of not only self-preservation, but the preservation of everyone else as well. And given the amount of harm that patriarchy has actually caused, I mean, it's pretty worrying that I would even say that, but truth be told, that's a subconscious thing that most people are unaware of. And because of that, we have a situation where our sexual repression is projected onto people who are othered. In women's case, it's projected onto gay men. Like a lot of gay fan fiction that I've seen, like written by women, or anything, sexuality is written by women, it's almost as if when it comes to addiction problems, when it comes to, more sort of outlier behaviors like being sexually liberated, all of these things, it seems to be more acceptable coming from a gay man than it is for a woman. So I feel like when people like Madrano write gay characters, they're giving themselves, it's like the gay characters are a vehicle through which they can explore the more taboo sides of themselves, like the sexuality, or even the addiction, or even the less cookie cutter responses of trauma. So I feel like the reason why a lot of cis women, or cis het women, or even cis queer women like to use gay men as a vehicle, either in their own minds or in their writing, the reason why they like to do that is because a lot of these women don't want what society says they should want. And even if they don't necessarily live a life where they have like 2.4 children and all the rest of it, they're still repressed in some way. They're not as free as they'd like to be. So they're assuming, well, if I was a man, and especially if I was a feminized gay man, this is what I would be doing. I would be having a lot of sex. I would be, sexually adventurous, this, that, and the third, right? But that's what it's like. It's like, because you feel like you're not free enough to explore your sexuality, you project that onto gay men, and you assume that because they're gay, they have more freedom than you. But the truth of the matter is that there are still places in this country where they can't walk down the street and be themselves, especially not feminized gay men. They can't walk down the street and be themselves. We've got governments in this world right now contemplating reintroducing the death penalty for gay people as a whole. for queer people as a whole. We've got countries that have already exterminated gay people, like Chechnya. So when we're looking at gay people and assuming, oh, you just have the freedom to just do what you want, like, in reality, it's not like that at all. These people didn't choose to be gay. And all over the world, there are rights rolling back all over the place in a bid to cover up for all the deliberate fuck-ups that our governments have been putting in place to redirect our money into war toys. So it's just like the persecution of the LGBTQ plus community. Like, you know, the shit that queer folk actually go through, it's like, it's mad. Like, the shit that they actually go through is mad. And yet we assume that just because they have sex a certain way, or we're thinking that we would have sex a certain way if we were them, because we think that, it's like we assume that they're freer than we are because they, you know, they seemingly get to have hookup cultures. And I'm like, that's not freedom. Freedom is being able to be who you are, to walk down the street without facing hate crime. That's freedom. It's being able to go all over the world knowing that you're not going to be persecuted for being who you are openly. That's freedom. And gay women don't have that. Gay men don't have that. And trans people definitely don't have that. So our projection from the female repression of sexuality, it's a big problem, and it's a huge problem, because not only does it make life worse for queer people, it's also a reflection of how women are still held under bondage here and here. Even if the laws have changed, we're still held under a certain bondage where we think to ourselves, well, if we're not going to be allowed to have sexual freedom, we might as well not have sex at all. We might as well not date. It's led to so many problems. The repression of women and the repression of AFAB, gender neutral people, has led to so many fucking problems. Because if you took the repression goggles off, you'd know that if you were a gay man or a gay woman, you'd have just about as much sex as you're having now. But because of repression, because you're being pressured into a certain situation and you don't necessarily know who you are sexually, you project your sexuality or your violence or your addiction. You project the things that, you know, your more primal instincts into people that are already othered. So not only are you living vicariously through these people, you're demonizing them on top of that, because you're thinking to yourself, well, if I was this person, I'd be this way. A lot of gay men don't believe in hookup culture. A lot of gay women don't always want to settle down and you know, within 2 weeks of knowing somebody. All of these things are stereotypes. They've got a grain of truth in them, but it's a grain. Do you understand? It's not the whole fucking bag of rice. It's a grain. And the problems with sexual repression is that it can cause us to blow these stereotypes into a bag of rice and think to ourselves, well, this is how it must always be. Do you understand what I'm saying? Now, I'm specifically talking about the projection of cis women and cis het women onto gay men, and cis het men and cis men onto gay women. I'm specifically talking about that. But the truth of the matter is the dynamics of male anatomy and female anatomy, they also have an effect on our behavior. I know that's very controversial to say, but that plays a part as well. You know, that just makes it even more complex. It's just such a complex thing when you really think about it. And you also have to consider that men, whether homosexual or heterosexual or bisexual or any of that, men are usually encouraged to be more sexual, to be more violent. Men are encouraged to kind of act on their basic instincts. 9 times out of 10 they're called upon to act on their basic instincts. without further context or without understanding what those basic instincts are meant to be used for, but that's for another video. So it's a complex thing, because that, you know, there are some gay men who do believe in hookup culture, and you know, men in general are not the most hygienic people. But again, it's a complex thing. But the point that I'm making, it's not actually about men or gay men. It's actually about women projecting our sexuality onto men because we are repressed and we don't have the freedom to decide what kind of lives we actually want. That's what it boils down to. Now, truth be told, the only reason why I'm pointing this out, it's not so that we can blame patriarchy, and it's not so that we can blame men or anything like that. It's so that we can take ownership over our own lives and decide what we want for ourselves, and find ways to make a bigger impact throughout the world. We've got all these femininity coaches saying, you know, saying basically the same thing that men are saying, but trying to reframe it as if it's empowering us. Not all women want to be in relationships. Not all women need to be in relationships. This is the thing. Not all people need to be in monogamous relationships. Not all people need to be in relationships, period. Not all people need to have sex. But because of sexual repression, we do not understand our own desires, and we don't understand where they come from. There are a lot of women who would live like Samantha from Sex and the City. But again, the only type of women who are living that type of life are either quite courageous people who face a lot of flack for what they do, or they belong to the dark triad, or they're very heavily traumatized. Because of sexual repression, it takes us a significant amount of damage or a significant amount of courage to live that kind of life. But not all women want relationships. There are some women who want to live like Samantha from Sex and the City. They want to have a career that they really love to do, that fills them with joy every single time they go to the office or they open up their laptop. They want to do things that they really love to do, and then have really great sex on the side. There are women who want to do that. There are women who want to like have their career and have really great sex on the side. There are women who don't actually want to have sex. Now, me personally, I've projected not my sexuality not only onto queer guys, but also to asexual men as well, quiet as it's kept. But that's up here. I haven't written anything down like that yet. Because deep down, sometimes I feel enslaved by my sexuality, and I don't want to feel enslaved by my sexuality. It's me kind of like projecting my desires onto asexuality. It's actually me not saying that I don't want to have sex. It's saying that I don't want sex to rule me. I don't want it to take a hold of me. And then there are times where I've fantasized about like that I've had ideas about like queer male characters in my head. And yeah, they are very sexual, but they're also very, you know, they're very blunt, they're very open, they're very outspoken, and they're loved for it. So it's like, you know, they're not just like really, you know, they're not just hypersexual. Actually, like a lot of queer men in my mind, they're not very hypersexual. They're actually very normal. But it's just like, you know, there's a little bit of spice to them. There's a little bit of fire to them. And I feel like, you know, that's me basically saying, I want to be able to express my anger in a healthy way. I want to be able to express my anger. And instead of people trying to humble me when I get angry, and especially when I get angry for legitimate reasons, I don't want people to just fucking, you know, try to silence me or try to humble me. Because a black woman, and especially a black woman who's neurodivergent, when she gets angry, a lot of people want to try to humble her out of her anger. And in fact, it's women in general. It's women in general. Whenever we get angry, especially when we get angry over things that we know are legitimate, there's always this effort to silence us or to make us feel a certain type of way. That's why the queer male characters that I have in here, they're not just like, they're usually like high power career dudes. They're usually not afraid to show their anger when they need to. They're usually actually quite big hearted. Like, they have a lot of love to give. It's just that they have really good boundaries. You know what I mean? Like, it's like everything that you repress about yourself, it comes out in what you desire or what you think about or the images that you project onto other people. So those are my queer male characters that I haven't written down yet. And it just goes to show that your desires come from what you ultimately lack or the wounds that you haven't actually healed. And I feel like for a lot of women, the wounds they haven't healed are not necessarily addiction or sexual trauma or anything like that. The wounds that haven't collectively been healed among women are the wounds of identity. Because we're told, because we're built a certain way, we have to act a certain way. And unfortunately, when both men and women are told that, who pays the price for it? It's queer people that pay the price, because queer people are already marginalised. They're already othered. So all this discrimination that we see against the queer community, it's born from our repression. It's born from, let's use cis-het men fantasizing about two women, right? Let's use that as an example. The reason why they fantasize about two women going at it is because the man ultimately has insecurities about his own manhood. Remember, men are genetically predispositioned to want to be the alpha, right? That means their seed and only their seed goes through as many women as possible. So this fantasy about women loving women that men have, it's really needing to feel secure in the knowledge that nobody else can really outman them. That's what that's about. It's about, feeling like, with women, it's about expressing a side of ourselves that we don't necessarily get to express. With men, it's something different. It's about like wanting to feel like the only man in the room, because again, genetically, male bodies are predispositioned towards competition, towards sport, towards dispersion, and towards separation. They want to be the only man in the room. That's what's behind a lot of girl-on-girl fantasies. They want to be the only man in the room. Yeah? So that a lot of, on a collective basis, that's what's behind, like, girl-on-girl fantasies. Because they want to be the only man in the room. There's a lot of insecurity revolved around manhood. And when you live in a patriarchy that emphasizes competition, hyper-individualism, all of which is an exacerbation of biologically male characteristics, when all of these things are emphasized, hyper-individuality, all the rest of it, when you feel like there are so many other men in the world that you have to compete with, what better fantasy could there be than no other men in the room at all apart from you? Or, like I said before, there's the fear aspects. So what I've described right now with the women loving women fantasy that a lot of straight men have, I've described the lack, what men lack, what men feel that they lack. Feeling like the most superior man in the room. Now we've got to get into the fear. Cuck fantasies are also quite popular among cis-het men. Cuck fantasies. And that's due to a fear of not being good enough. That's due to a fear of, not being seen as the only man in the room. Or conversely, it could low-key be a focus on taking the pressure off the male to perform or to be a part of this competition among men. It could be that he doesn't want to be part of this competition, so he fantasizes about like being cucked or whatever, because he wants to opt out of the competition. He wants to just sit back and observe the world rather than having to be a part of the games that this patriarchy encourages men to play. So there could be that aspects of it as well. Again, a lot is revealed through what people desire. And coming back to women fantasizing about men loving men, whatever we feel is celebrated in the male body, whatever we feel like is celebrated in the male body, we often project onto the male body. Do you know what I mean? Whereas with men, it's a little bit different. It's not about, celebrating, it's not about releasing repressed qualities into the woman. It's about, because men are naturally externalized anyway. Like the male form is naturally an externalizing force. So it's really not about, what men are allowed to let go of. It's what men are allowed to keep. So women and cis-het women and cis women, they fantasize about what they're allowed to release into the world without judgment. And men fantasize about what they're allowed to keep without judgment. Do you understand what I mean? That's what it's all about. Men fantasize about wanting to keep as much of what they have to themselves as possible without judgment, or, to just opt out of the race, to just opt out of this fucking pissing contest without judgment. You know what I mean? But I'm speaking specifically in terms of cis and cis-het people fantasizing about like queer relationships are quite often, people who have a certain amount of privilege. They're dead inside. Their privilege makes them a bit more dead inside than marginalized people. So what happens is that we end up projecting all the things we want to let go of, or all the things that we want to keep, into marginalized communities. But again, the problem with that is that we create further problems for marginalized people by doing this. Now, I'm not straight, okay? I'm heteroflexible, but I'm not entirely straight. I do like men, but I like women a little bit more. But it's just like the fantasies, there's something that we really need to pay attention to. Or not only do we need to pay attention to the kind of life that we actually want to live, we also need to pay attention to the effect that our projections have on these communities, because these communities are human beings. They want the same things that we want. They want safety. They want freedom. They want to feel like they can move through the world, learn and enjoy life. They want the same things that we do. They just happen to have different physical compositions. That's all. That's all. That is all. They have different physical compositions. And that's it. I feel like us projecting our qualities into what someone is rather than who someone is in writing and in creation, like projecting ourselves into what someone is rather than who someone is that's a big problem. That's a huge problem. That's a huge problem. Huge. Do you know what I mean? And that type of thinking is why, LGBTQ plus people, apart from the disabled, are usually the first on the chopping block politically. Because in casting them aside, in casting us aside, the world is able to just shelve their healing journey, put it aside. Like I said before, the worrying thing about humanity is that we would rather literally see endless genocide than improve here and here. That is how powerful psychological improvement is that there are so many people in this world who would literally rather kill or die than have to improve psychologically or in here. That's why this and this are so fucking powerful and so fucking important. Because literally people would rather kill or die to avoid looking inward and to avoid getting better and to avoid doing the right thing for themselves and living by their integrity. They would rather kill, die, abuse, harm, lie. They would rather do all these things than admit what they are and admit what they want. And it's caused problems with procreation. It's caused problems with family dynamics. It's caused family dysfunctions. It's caused social dysfunctions. It's caused relationship dysfunctions, because people are just not open about who they are. And also, while we're on the subject, people do not have respect for violence. They don't have respect for sex, and they don't have respect for identity. These things are not to be feared, and they're not to be used as, used as weapons to control one another. They are to be used for our ascension and for the ascension of humanity. That's what they're meant to be used for, but they're not used for that. They're used so that an increasingly few amount of people can have the most power. That's what they're used for. And repression is how those things grow to be monsters. Like violence becomes monstrous, sex becomes monstrous, identity becomes monstrous, because these things are repressed and they're not explored with maturity and care and connection. These things not being handled with the care and respect they deserve is how we get abuse. It's how we get every type of racism, sexism, homophobia, all that type of shit. Because people don't respect violence, they don't respect sex, they don't respect identity. They think that these things are all naughty things, or like we use these things in fiction as a dopamine rush. We don't have respect for them. And the more that we repress these things, and we've seen it throughout history, the more we repress these things, is the bigger the wars get, the bigger the weapons get, the more people that are killed with each conflict. And when it comes to the repression of sex, ironically, the repression of sex is actually what leads to promiscuity. It's actually what leads to promiscuity, which is sex negative behavior born from trauma. Having great sex here and there and having a great career is not the same as promiscuity that is out of control. It's not the same. But that's how we get out of control sexual behavior. And then on the other hand, you've got, out of control restrictions on sexual behavior. And both of them lead to the same problems, actively through promiscuity and passively through repression of all the familial dysfunctions and all the relationship dysfunctions that we see in the world. And all these things build industries. Because industries are not built on needs already being fulfilled. They are built on needs being unfulfilled. What's making the world go round is our misery, and our misery comes from not knowing ourselves. And this is where we get to the really difficult part about repression and its effect on the queer community and its effect on anybody who's marginalized. This is where we get into the really hard part about this. The way the world is built right now, it's built on repression, and it's built on people being miserable, and especially women. That's what it takes to build a world like this. People being dead inside. And that's what you get when you get women who can't, who can't do the same things that men do, like have great careers and have sex when they need to have sex. Because sometimes sex isn't emotional. Sometimes sex is like eating. Sometimes you need to eat. But women don't get to do that. Women have to starve themselves so that this world doesn't think of them as slaws. Which leads, ironically, some women to being promiscuous. It's because of the judgment around sex, not in spite of it. It takes women being unhappy and not knowing themselves in order for this world to function. In fact, it takes everybody being miserable and not knowing themselves in order for this world to function. And it's LGBTQ plus people, it's marginalized people who are not white, it's people who are on the outskirts of society or who are so-called outliers of society that suffer the most for this repression. And like I said before, a lot of women just want to do what men do. Some women just want to have great careers and have sex on the side. Some women don't want to have sex at all. Some women want children, some women don't. Some women want to be married to one man for the rest of their lives. Other women want to be polyamorous. Some women only want to be with men. Some want to be with women. Some, like, the sexual freedom of a woman is so important for humans to live within the world harmoniously. The sexual freedom of everyone is important, but especially women. And truth be told, a lot of women don't want to do what men are doing because men are doing it. That's not what feminism is. That's not what women's rights are. It's not about women wanting to do what men do because men are doing it. That's not the point. The point is, we want the freedom to actually explore who we are as people. We want the freedom to be excellent. We want the freedom to be mediocre. We want the freedom to, all these freedoms that men allow themselves. We want that same freedom too. We want that grace to be able to grow and change and transform and be given the grace to do that. We want that same grace. That's all we actually want. The grace to be ourselves, without the additional judgment from not being cis-het white men. That's all we want. We don't want fucking, we don't want to take over the world, or we don't want a gynocracy. That's not what the fuck we want. We just want to be able to have the freedom to live how we want to live. And it's in not having this freedom. Even white women, even a lot of white women don't have this freedom. And it's in women not having this freedom. Let alone black women, honey. Oof. It is in women, cis-het women, not having this freedom. And cis women not having this freedom. That means that queer folk suffer. Queer men, queer women, because remember, a lot of straight passing women, they like to go to queer women to fill the orgasm gap now. That's what I mean. It's constant problems. Queer men are suffering. Queer women are suffering. Trans people are suffering. And people of color and black people suffering because of repression. Because the true nature of who we are is being repressed to such a level that, the hidden selves that we hold within us, they're becoming monsters. And we're turning those monsters onto people that we don't really understand. We're monsterizing them because of our own pain and our own repression. That's why this shit is so fucking important. Think about the amount of racists that monsterize races that don't belong to them. That push their flaws onto races that don't belong to them. And the more privileged those races are, the worse it gets. Think about how they do that to people of different races. Think about, don't just think about women and gay men. Think about race too. Think about religion too. Think about all these things too. And you get an accurate picture of what we do to each other and the effects that these things cause. And once again, we're coming back to a time where monsterizing the other is becoming fashionable again, because people don't want to do the mental work and don't want to do the emotional work. That is what it boils down to. They would rather have ethnic cleansing, social cleansing, all kind of cleansing. They would rather have all that than do the mental work and the emotional work. That's how powerful these things are. And I said I wasn't going to talk about gang stalking, but let me bring that up too. Why do you think a small group of people are being tortured and experimented on? It's to fuck with this and this. That's how powerful these motherfucking things are. You can beat the fuck out of somebody for one day to get them to do something that you want them to do. If you're a violent piece of shit, you can beat someone to get you to do what they want them to do. Right? And the effect of that beating can be so powerful here and here that it can affect the behavior of the person decades later or even throughout their entire lives. Ask people who beat their kids. Ask people who beat their kids when their kids were young and the effect on the kids now. That's how powerful the mind and the heart are. That's how powerful they are. You could have one incident and that one incident can affect you for the rest of your life. That's how powerful that shit is. That's why people would rather have whole genocides than do the work. People would rather have whole genocides than do the work. And even with the experimentation into gang stalking, please understand it's a cycle, it's energetic warfare. It's psychological warfare before it's anything else. Because if you interrupt somebody's pain and pleasure receptors, there is the hope that you can change who they are as a person. That's how powerful this shit is. That's how powerful this shit is. You change this and this, you could literally change somebody's genetics. That's how powerful that shit is. And when you interrupt the trauma by looking deeper into it, when you interrupt the trauma by looking deeper into it, you interrupt those things by questioning everything that you've been raised to believe. When you start doing that, you unravel centuries of terror. You unravel centuries of brainwashing. You unravel millennia of pain and violence and degradation. No wonder people are scared. No wonder people are scared of wokeness. Because doing the emotional work is powerful and scary. But for me, doing the emotional work is important. Doing the emotional work is incredibly important. It's important to understand how we project the lives that we want to live onto other people, or project our shadow selves onto other people. It's important to understand that. And it's important to understand that primality and evil are not the same. They're not the same. Primal instincts and evil, true evil, not the same thing. And all the problems that we have in the world is the failure to recognize that. Because what we've got is us denying our primal selves and having those primal selves grow out of all control, which leads to the problems of us projecting our repressed selves onto the other. It's big stuff. It can't be underestimated. Can't be underestimated. That's why I really wanted to talk about this. Vivian Madrano and the 7 sins of modern writing and all this, these wonderful talking points, all this wonderful discourse. Sorry, my plug's acting up. All this wonderful discourse that we're having about writing, about, critiquing what we watch, like all these wonderful conversations we're having, it's part of the emotional labor of improving as human beings. But again, because because of the way human beings work, again, human beings would rather go through endless physical pain and endless trauma than do the real painful hard work of fixing our minds and our hearts. And that's the truth. Human history has shown us that. As for me, I'm not perfect. Even as I'm talking about this now, I still have projections of the life that I want to live, or the life that I feel that was denied to me. I still have that. But recognizing it and recognizing where it comes from, that's how empowerment starts. That's how self-love starts. And most importantly, that's how improvement of writing starts. Because seeing our emotions as they are, it can lead to better writing, because that's what art is supposed to be about. It's supposed to be about emotion. And if you're living vicariously through your work instead of, expressing who you are, it means that the basics of writing can go out the window. We've got too many creators out here living vicariously through the work that they do rather than, expressing authentic emotion. It's not just Vivienne Medrano. It's not even just modern writing. It's it's the it's the industry period. It's the industry period. And it's always been like that. We've always had works like that. It's just it's just technical perfection that we value. And it's a technical perfection that allows some people to get away with projection rather than actually emoting something. But yeah, understanding how we view people who are different to us, it's more important than you might think. And as for targeted individuals, I've got to include targeted individuals as well, because a lot of people project their shadow sides onto us as well. Of course, we don't help matters with our behavior, and I especially haven't helped matters with my behavior. But this is another thing of society projecting its otherness onto us. That's part of what makes gang stalking not successful, because I wouldn't call it successful, but it's not failing. It's not failing. It's not succeeding, but it's not failing either. And the reason it's not failing is because of this entire discussion that I've been having this morning with you guys. It's the projection of lesser sides of people's characters, or it's projection of the shadow self onto us. Because what would I be doing if I was a TI, or if I called myself a TI? That is the image that we are saddled with. It's very destructive. It is so destructive. And, I can't think of anything that proves more than gang stalking, that people are literally willing to kill, traffic, abuse, and genocide rather than do this and this work. You're not going to get any better proof than the targeted community. But anyway, I think I better go. On that note, yeah. If my fellow targets, and when I say my fellow targets, I mean non-homophobic targets. Like, if you're homophobic or queerphobic, I don't want to hear what you got to say. I really don't. Keep that in your pocket. Keep that to yourself. Your comment will be deleted and blocked otherwise. Okay? So for those who are not homophobic, for those who are not racist, for those who are not sexist, let me know in the comments how you guys are. And let me know what you think about this subject matter that I've brought up today. I know it's a kind of a departure, but when I think about it, it comes back right back around to TIs too. Yeah. So let me know how you guys are doing. We'll talk soon. Peace and blessings. I hope I made sense anyway. If I didn't, yeah, you know. But yeah, I hope I made sense. Peace and blessings, you guys. I love you so much. Bye-bye.